All right. I think we can get things started. All right. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us this evening. We hope everybody's staying safe and healthy. I am Marcus Schweitzer. I'm the Executive Director for the Win the Era effort. You've heard us talk a bit about some of the work that we've been able to do. We thank you all for your support and encouragement as we've launched the organization and seeing what we can do this cycle. But without further ado, I turn it over to Mayor Pete.
All right. Well, Marcus, thanks for bringing us to order, and thanks for all your work as Executive Director of Win the Era. And thanks to everybody for joining us tonight. Excited to have another opportunity to respond to questions and to be in touch. And I love seeing the comments fill up with people from literally every corner of this country. I want to start by showing you something actually from here in the house, which is, I don't know how well you can see it, but this came in the mail from a friend who I had served with and his wife, who has been making masks out of his old uniforms from the Navy. She used to send us care packages when he and I were both deployed, and is now finding a new way to care for people that are important to their family. And it's just one example of something I think that we can all look to and think about at a moment like this, as so many people in their own original ways are finding out how to support and contribute to this broader effort, from an individual act like that to help somebody be a little more prepared and able to get out and about, to the acts of generosity and the acts of courage that we're seeing on the front lines of this, as medical providers take, and those who support them take risks in order to treat patients, to the generosity that's going into making sure that people are taken care of when they're facing hunger around the country. It's an example of how this terrible situation can bring out the best in so many of us. That's not to have any illusions about what we're up against. I think we're seeing, even more than we did in the early days of this crisis, what we're up against. And we're seeing how this crisis has really brought out a lot of weaknesses in our system, in our political and economic arrangements. And so the biggest thing on my mind as our country moves into this conversation, state by state, about who can open, whether to open, how to open, when to open, is to remember that it is neither possible nor desirable to go back to things exactly as they were. We can't just reproduce the conditions that help make our country as vulnerable to the situation we're in right now. Everything from racial inequities in health to a growing disregard for the warnings of scientists has made it harder for our country to face this challenge. But it also means that there's an opportunity here for us to come back in a different way. I've also been really encouraged by the bipartisan work that's going on. And if you're interested in getting out of this conversation about either continued economic pain or terrible risks and loss of life, as if those are our only choices, I definitely encourage you to familiarize yourself with some of the phenomenal work that's going on, explaining exactly how we can find a safer way to reopen. One of them was published by the Safra Center for Ethics at Harvard, but it was a group of people from all kinds of different disciplines and from around the country. And what they created, it's called a Roadmap to Pandemic Resilience. Worth a look if you want to Google it, because what they've done is actually taken up the analysis of what it will take for us to be able to safely reopen. The bottom line is there's going to have to be a lot of testing and a lot of contact tracing. You might also see a lot of good work that's come out this week on a bipartisan basis by an FDA director from the Republican administration, and Andy Slavitt, who was the head of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid under the Obama administration. Again, a focus on testing, and also looking at the kind of contact tracing that's going to have to happen. That means when somebody tests positive, reaching out and helping them find anybody they might have been exposed to. This is a huge part of what it's going to take to reopen safely. And one of the reasons I'm following this closely is the estimates suggest that we'll need at least 100,000 people to be part of that effort. And if you're wondering what it's going to take to get those people drawn together, organized, trained, and equipped, it's actually something that I think is really resonant with the idea of national service that we talk about all the time on the campaign, whether that's through existing modes, like making sure we mobilize people in AmeriCorps or the Peace Corps who have been sidelined by the current crisis, or creating new ways, just as the WPA did during the New Deal period, to put people to work. So those are just a few of the things that I wanted you to know about that are out there in the solution space. I also think we have to ask ourselves some really hard questions about how we got here and about where we need to go as a country in order to recover in a way that isn't just rewinding to where we were. I also think it's not only okay, but really important for us to continue being politically active. This is not a time to back away from the political, because these choices are intrinsically political. And that's part of what's at stake in what we have put together with the Win the Era PAC, which I would invite you to get involved with if you can. We have a very basic website up now at wintheera.com. More is emerging where that came from. And many of you have already weighed in with ideas for candidates that the Win the Era PAC should be backing, as well as causes that the Win the Era Action Fund, which is a nonprofit we're setting up alongside that political action committee, can take up. We're not going to be able, of course, to support every deserving candidate, but what we're aiming to do, and right now we're sifting through and poring over the ideas and the names that you've sent. What we plan to do is support a range of candidates that illustrates the amazing leadership coming from a diverse generation of people ready to serve and make a difference, who embody the same qualities and the same beliefs that drove the Peak for America campaign that so many of you were such a big part of. So we'll continue to have more information for you going into May as we release our first list of people who we've endorsed. And again, I cannot thank you enough for those who had a chance and taken the trouble to either contribute to the new effort financially or to contribute ideas about who it is that we might support. So those are a couple things going on our end, but I want to kick it back over to Marcus for the best part of these calls, which is always taking up the questions that were submitted throughout the day through the RFP form that you filled in order to be part of this call.
Right. Thank you so much, Mayor. Our first question is from Cecile from Cantonville. Her question is, since you have to be 18 to donate, what can young people do to contribute to Win the Era?
Great. So I've always believed that you don't have to be old enough to donate or old enough to vote in order to make a huge difference. Here's some things that I think would be really important. First of all, have a look at the values that we've laid out that we're trying to back through Win the Era, and think about how to support those values in your own community, whether it's as a volunteer in a campaign effort that is taking place or as an advocate in perhaps a decision that's about to be made. But one thing we're seeing right and left in this pandemic is just how important local government and local decisions are. And that's also one of the levels where young people can have the most impact. Yes, young people have an important voice in national politics, but also don't overlook your own backyard. And this is partly my bias as a mayor, but I have seen decisions happen differently because young people spoke out and got the attention of decision makers about decisions that were going to affect us. That ties in so well with what we're trying to do at Win the Era. And while it may not be as simple now as knocking on doors for a campaign or physically showing up at a council meeting, there are digital ways to be involved. And that's the other thing that we would ask you to do, to spread the word about what we're doing. To make sure through social media or through your networks of friends that others are aware of the causes and eventually the candidates that we're going to support, spreading the word about why they deserve our help and helping to make sure that we build just a great momentum for the values that we care about and the candidates we believe in.
Great. Thanks so much. Our next question comes from Wes from Omaha. What rules of the road do you find to be of highest importance during this pandemic?
Well, a lot of them come to mind, and for folks who haven't followed our campaign as closely, these are the rules of the road, the values that guided our campaign and continue to be very important to the way we do business, like teamwork, belonging, boldness, discipline, substance, excellence, joy, respect. I think respect remains an important one because we're at this moment where I think a lot of us are rightfully horrified by some of the decisions being made, certainly by this president and the lack of leadership we see in some states. And at the same time, there's an opportunity, I think, to have a respectful conversation with people who maybe politically haven't always agreed with us, but who can see why in this era we need better political leadership. I think discipline is going to be an important one because we don't have the external disciplines that have been created by having routine or sometimes a physical workplace for those who are not working in their regular places that they go to. And so we have to create our own kinds of discipline. And then maybe the one we really got to pay attention to at a moment like this is joy. We've got to make sure that we support one another, lift one another up, and find the joy that so much is in need of being spread at a moment when there's also such pain, such suffering, such harm, and such fear. And part of how we can deal with harm and fear is by putting forward good ideas on fixing the underlying problem. Part of it is also making sure we bring a little bit of light into the world. And one of my favorite things about this campaign was how in my travels I got to know different voters and volunteers and supporters who just exuded that kind of joy that we're going to need to get each other through this.
Great. Our next question is from Stephen, and he asks, what can we do to advocate for vote by mail?
Okay, great question. So here's the thing about the American system. We have national, federal guardrails, limits on some of what can happen in terms of our elections, like the Voting Rights Act. But most of these decisions are being made at the state level and even the local level, since county officials are often responsible for the actual running of elections. And so this is another example of where the advocacy, the activism has to be close to home. Is your Secretary of State doing the right thing? Has your governor spoken out on these issues? And your state legislators, who maybe unlike a U.S. senator or a governor, can be expected to return your phone call. Are your state legislators pushing for doing the right thing? Let me also add that while it's very important that we have vote by mail available to every American in this election, we also need to make sure that there continue to be other means of voting too, especially finding safe ways for in-person voting, because not everybody has access to vote by mail, and people who don't have a fixed address, often low-income, vulnerable people, some of those with the most on the line in these elections, are also at risk. The other thing that's extremely important is ensuring that we push back on the kinds of voter suppression like purges that are hard to deal with if you've been purged and you go in person to vote. Think about how much harder it is to deal with if you are trying to vote by mail and negotiate that process in that way. And that's why organizations like Stacey Abrams' group, Fair Fight, Let America Vote, and others deserve our support and our attention in ensuring that these kinds of interference that sometimes happen on the roster don't become even more powerful in an era of vote by mail. So I guess my message is more vote by mail is good, it's important, we should do it, and we should push for it, especially with state elected officials. But in and of itself, it's not all there is to the solution. That's why we've got to push back on voter suppression, especially racially motivated voter suppression, and ensure that there continue to be safe methods for voting in addition to mail.
Great, thank you. So our next question is from Jacqueline. And her question is, what advice would you give to someone looking to run for office for the first time?
Oh, I'm glad to hear you're thinking of that, Jacqueline. And, the first advice I'd give is you don't have to get permission to run. If you know what it is you would bring to an office that's different than anybody else can bring, then it's simply a matter of bringing that message out. Another thing I would encourage you to do, though, is strike that right balance between your own view and your own message and listening to what others have to say. I often found that there was something that was being done a certain way and I didn't understand it. And the more questions I asked, the more I would sometimes learn that there really was a reason. Other times I'd learned that there wasn't a reason or there wasn't a good one. And then I knew that I needed to do everything I could to change it. And look, when you're new, when you're running for the first time, you'll get a lot of funny looks. You'll get a lot of people who tell you haven't waited your turn. That's part of the process. Don't let that slow you down because everybody in office ran, they had a first time somewhere. And last thing I'll say is I hope that it goes well for you. But if it doesn't, don't let that be the last word. I didn't win my first election. A lot of our most effective and successful leaders in this country, probably a majority of them, didn't. And so count the experience you're getting as a candidate as something that will serve you well in public leadership, whether you win the first time or not.
All right, and our next question is one that I've seen a couple of times in the chat as well. But this is from Angie from Deer Forest. And her question is, what's the single most important thing we can do today to support Joe Biden's campaign?
I'll give you two. First of all, just make sure you're plugged in. You can go to Joe Biden's website. You can text. I think it's to 30330 if you text Joe, just to make sure that the campaign can get a hold of you when there are important things happening in your area, in your state, in your jurisdiction. Of course, like every campaign, they need financial support too, and it's harder to do that at a moment like this where campaigning has changed. The other thing I'd really urge you to do is to make sure that you're reaching out to people who may not be there, either people who may not be voting at all or who had a different candidate in the primary and have not felt engaged in this campaign. If you had a different candidate in the primary, I get it. Obviously, I get it. I was a different candidate in the primary. But this is a time for us to come together and for us to build unity. Actually, I was thinking about it. In the last 3 or 4 days, I've spoken to, I think, 4 of the different people that I was competing against for president just a few months ago. And we've been talking about the shared values and the absolute imperative of making sure we get the White House in the right hands. We're not going to agree on everything, no two people do, but this is even more of an existential election than it already was. And it's not just in terms of the bleakness of what will happen to our country if we continue on the path that we're on. Also the fact that Joe Biden is somebody who is marked by compassion and by decency. And this is a moment where we're getting a lot of that in the White House.
Great. All right. Our next question is from Michael from New York. And the question is, how can we help Democrats win up and down the ticket in November?
Right. So, one thing I'm a little worried about is because of the impact of the pandemic, we're seeing even less, the presidential campaign always sucks up a lot of the oxygen and a lot of the attention. But that's even more true right now. So I love your question about up and down the ticket because we need good leadership at every level. And we're seeing it right now in the way that governors and mayors and others who maybe have not been in the spotlight before are really rising to lead the response. And it's not only because of the failures of the White House, it's also just the case that a lot of these decisions are best made at the local level and are part of our federalist system is that we're supposed to have well-functioning government at each level. We know what we need to do about the White House, but there's a lot that we can do at those other levels too. So a big thing is spreading the word. If you're active on social media, make sure people know not just how you feel. Look, every time the president says something deranged, it dominates the attention, right? But most of us already know that bleach is for external use only. So as soon as we've cleared that up, let's get back to lifting up the stories of other candidates who deserve attention. And of course, that's part of what we're trying to do with Win the Era too. Sending a message through a selection of candidates about the kind of people we think we need more of in elected office. And then it's the things that campaigns always need. It's moral support, it's getting the word out, it's donations, it's volunteering. Volunteering is going to be different this time because door knocking won't be what it used to be. But there's still going to be a ton of need for getting on the phone, for text banking and other things that are an important way of getting the word across.
Great. The next question is from Melanie from Hemet. Question is, does the Win the Era PAC have a publicly available list of down ballot candidates it's supporting? Thanks.
All right, so we will. And again, what we're doing right now is we really took that input that we got from you, our community of supporters, seriously. We're also making sure we're connecting with advocacy groups that I respect and with different organizations across the party to source some really great candidates. There's some marquee races that we could all rattle off the top of our head probably because they get a lot of attention. I want to make sure we're also supporting some races that haven't been heard of as much. And so that's the process we're in right now. We're targeting early May, and shockingly, early May is just a few days away. But that's when we aim to put out the first roster of people we're supporting. And as soon as we do, I hope I can count on you to help spread the word and help support those campaigns.
Great. Our next question is from Trisha from Decatur. And it's, what are some of the ways we can heal the racial disparities that have become so prevalent during the pandemic?
So one of the things that we talked about a lot on the campaign were the racial inequities in health outcomes, things like the maternal mortality gap, the fact that Black men are more likely to be diagnosed with diabetes and with hypertension, the fact that Latino men are more likely to, among the most likely to suffer from HIV/AIDS exposure. And all of the different kinds of racially disparate health issues that go on in this country. Now in the pandemic, we're seeing a whole new level of that. And it's as I've said before, it's not that the virus is discriminating by race. It's that it's revealing a country that is discriminated by race in so many ways. It's why I believe that the future packages that Congress is putting forward need to have specific resources dedicated to health equity. That's why we need to gather more data. And it's beginning to happen. Certain states are better than others at making sure that data on susceptibility to COVID-19 is being gathered and published by race so that we can really identify those racial issues. And fundamentally, it means having an anti-racist economic and public health policy for the future. I know that the Biden campaign is committed to that. We're continuing to lift up ideas that were in the Frederick Douglass plan that we put forward that was very intentional about this. And we need to lift up Black voices in leadership in public health in every aspect of our society who can speak directly to the life experience and the social, political, and economic experience that has been made so different when it comes to the effect of race in this country.
Great. And our next question is from August from Pompano Beach. With the pandemic, how do we run successful campaigns in a new way?
So I've been thinking about this a lot because the truth is campaigning has changed in a lot of ways over the years. I mean, think about it. In the 19th century, there were times when it was considered impolite for a candidate to campaign on their own behalf. You're only supposed to have other people speak for you. There were times when people would campaign from home. Then you had the era of the whistle stop tour, people like Truman campaigning by train. Campaigns have always gone through a lot of changes. What's new is for it to happen so quickly. And that's what we're all figuring out right now. Look, in the end, the campaign is about convincing more people to vote for you than for your opponent. That's the fundamental reality that doesn't change. Questions are how. I think different ways of reaching people are going to become more important. I think TV remains very important, but now we have all these digital media to reach people. What we know is that campaigning still takes resources. It takes money. It takes word of mouth. It takes commitment. And I think more than anything, what we've got to do is unify those of us who know that things have to change. All of us who believe that this country is only going to get better if we have respect and dignity restored to office. And if we're ready to question the economic and political arrangements that we've just been living with, just dealing with for far too long, that we've tolerated for far too long. Again, we can't, it's not only impossible, it's undesirable to go back to the way things were working before with the same weaknesses, the same winners and losers. This is the time to change all of that. And that's what we're going to have to do through the political process. You can't be apolitical or non-political about some of these things. So, this is something we're all going to feel as we go. One of the things I was very proud of in this campaign, in our campaign, was how good our team and our staff were at virtual engagement and digital engagement, and every campaign's got to master those same techniques. We're going to use Win the Era also as a way to try to make sure we're connecting those tactical staff resources to campaigns that could benefit from them. And I know you can help us in that way too, because again, it was our community of supporters that was maybe the most powerful and magical thing about the campaign that we built.
All right, and we have time for one more question, and it's from Lauren from Noblesville. Hi, Pete. What kinds of new recipes have you and Chasten been trying while we're all stuck at home?
Oh, wow. Well, I just managed to re-season the iron skillet, so I'm excited to put that to work. That's mostly my speed, kind of preparing things, cleaning things. Chasten's one who's actually mastering recipes. He has made perfect buttermilk pancakes. He has continued to master his Brussels sprouts. What else did we do recently? We're getting pretty good with pasta. And kale chips are incredibly difficult, but he's working on perfecting an approach to kale chips too. And for my part, I'm just doing the dishes and letting the master practice his expertise. He had some kind of really original cake, chocolate cake too. I think maybe with mayonnaise. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with this recipe that was going around. Anyway, he made it. I ate it. It's fantastic.
That's great. All right. Well, that was our last question for today. We want to thank everybody for joining this evening. Hope everybody's staying safe and healthy. Mayor, if we can kick it to you for any last words before we sign off.
Just again, a big thank you to everybody who's a part of this community of supporters for taking time here. I always look forward to these interactions, and we're building out our capacity to have more and more people in these calls, which is great. Look, we've got a long road ahead, but I really believe right now we're living in a moment that will define what America is like for the balance of our lives. And that means that the simple fact of being politically active, socially active, active in your communities at a time like this has outsized importance. So please stay motivated, stay involved, stay safe, keep lifting each other up. And I'm looking forward to continuing to be in touch with you and in the future to being able to see you in person again too.
Great. Well, thank you, Mayor, and thank you everyone for joining again. We look forward to talking to everybody again soon. Have a great night.